All right, so today I'll be going over my contemporary business leader presentation for Management 420, Organizational Behavior and Management for Dr. Raquel Isaac Carlson. I'm giving this presentation. So today I'll be going over a business leader presentation that goes in depth about a certain individual's personal leadership experiences in order to learn and share what he has gone through to hopefully extend to others. I'll be going through the following points, which is a business leader description, application of leadership theory, leaders' greatest achievement, handling a challenge, power bases and impact of behavior, leadership style comparison, leadership lessons and reflections. So the leader I've interviewed and will be talking about today is my college pastor from the church that I go to called New City Church. Now, I've personally known Casey for just over a year now and become even closer with him over the past 6 months, working under him as a youth intern at the church. So, like I mentioned, Casey is a college pastor at New City and is one of the few pastors at the church. Casey's main role at the church at the moment is his role as a college pastor, where he's been in this role for just over a year now. Actually more of like a year and a half, and has been taking over his position after the old college pastors left last year, which was back in 2022. So just over a year and a half. Now Casey is also seen as the head youth pastor figure as well, which is where he actually started his position at New City. But right now he's currently in the process of transitioning out of this role and delegating this position. Casey's also the head of the young adults ministry, but that is a very hands-off ministry, so his main efforts are towards the college and youth ministries. Casey is also looked at as the head operations for the internship program at New City, which is where I personally have grown in my relationship with him, hence my youth internship. He also occasionally will give the messages in the main church service, but that is every now and then. Casey's been a part of New City for 3 years now, where he's originally started working as a youth pastor about 3 years ago. Casey moved to Arizona to take on the youth pastor role after spending his college and early young adult years in Colorado, working and serving at Red Rocks Church, where his ministry journey began from 2017 to 2021. Casey started attending Red Rocks, which eventually led to serving and volunteering, which then naturally led to becoming an intern for a summer at the church, unpaid internship. Casey then became even more involved by taking on the job at Red Rocks as one of the youth pastors. His progression at Red Rocks led him to transitioning to a New City where he is at today. Now, diving in, when looking at the various leadership theories, all leaders carry leadership traits that make them stand out as leaders. No leader is the same, and when analyzing and making sense of the different leadership theories, it's important to understand that each leader possesses one or all of these theories. Those theories are trait theories, behavioral theories, and contingency theories, hence said in the textbook. Casey, as a leader, mainly represents the behavioral theory more than the others. Not saying that he doesn't show the others, but the behavioral theory is what he shows the most. Now, in looking into this theory more in depth, there are two aspects that Casey applies to his leadership traits. Now, this first slide talks about his task-oriented trait because Casey's role at the church is very much like an initiation role for others like me working as an intern underneath him. He's the one that delegates the tasks to me and I take care of them. Now, since Casey's the head of operations for the internship program at the church, and specifically, like I said, my role within the youth, he's the one that organizes all the tasks for the other interns and is the leader and the figurehead for said job. Now, also within his task-oriented trait, Casey also has a transactional leadership because of his ability to clarify others' roles and task requirements. He also encourages and pushes us with the performance and jobs that we do and uses little rewards to help us keep all of us interns motivated. Now, this next slide continues on with leadership theories on the behavioral side, specifically highlighting this next aspect of him being relationship orientated. Now, this is a general statement, not solely just for Casey, but any pastor has to be relationship orientated, as this position of a pastor is to foster and to care for the people within the church. Now, Casey does a great job of doing this as he reflects what New City stands for as a church. New City embodies the idea of loving God and loving others as their mission statement. Their mission statement is quoted to say, "New City exists to make disciples who take the message of Jesus to the places they live, work, study, and play." Now, New City strives to be a place to foster the people of the church through teaching, application, and living, and that is what Casey represents in his role. Now, Casey is the definition of a leader with a servant's heart. He focuses on increased service to others rather than just himself. For example, in my position under Casey, he has lived through this position of being an intern at a church, hence Red Rocks, where he interned, and he never would make me do something that he wouldn't do. He's been through this position. He knows what it's like, and he won't do something that he wouldn't do himself. He doesn't just sit back, he serves alongside the others. Specifically within this college ministry that he's a part of, or that he leads, I should say, he created this monthly serving day where college kids go out and serve the community. Casey has always attended these serving events and is quote-unquote in the trenches, serving alongside all the other college kids. His ethical leadership is something that represents a moral leader who people look up to, as his position is literally to teach others essentially about life. He pours into every person he ministers and is aware of the impact that he can have on others. Now, when looking into Casey's greatest achievement, during this interview, when I asked him if he had any, he explained to me that in his ministry it's more about moments rather than achievements, which I thought was interesting. Because the mindset stems from an attitude of humility, which is what ministry is all about. Casey explained that there are seasonal moments throughout his ministry career and that these moments have prepared him to where he is at today. A lot of these moments that he goes through are the firsts that he experiences. From the moments like the first time leading a student to Christ or leading a mission trip are just examples of these little moments. Casey did say that there were some big ticket things, though, that he experienced. His first year as a youth pastor, he had to lead the fall kickoff event at Red Rocks Church where there was about 1,000 kids in attendance. He later did a similar event at a winter retreat. He also said that giving his message at the main church service for New City was a moment that he will never forget. Now, in analyzing his greatest moment, it's important to understand and realize what principles, strategies, and processes that created these standout moments and how they impacted his career up to this point. Now, using the example of Casey giving that fall kickoff message for the youth ministry at Red Rocks, and the major step he took in preaching shows the three elements that helped him: self-efficacy, emotional stability, and human skills. Casey showed high levels of self-efficacy as he needed to be able to have the confidence to say, "I can do this task," because public speaking is something that takes courage to execute. He also uses great levels of emotional stability because when speaking in front of a big crowd like that, he has to feel secure about his ability to speak with all those eyes watching him. The element of human skills as a pastor is very important as he has to be able to connect with people effectively. When adding up the score from the characteristics of leadership resource, he scored pretty high, which represents the moments that he have had major growth on his ministry career and the impact he has had and will have on people. Now, within the ministry, conflict is going to happen. As Casey stated, you work with people, you're going to face problems, people aren't perfect. One of the defining conflicts Casey faced early on was a confrontational issue with one of the youth leaders. During his time at Red Rocks in 2020, when he was one of the youth pastors, Casey found out that one of the girl youth leaders had been living together with her fiance at the time for a while before they got married, and was telling all the kids in the youth about how she was going about it in quote-unquote the right way in terms of the living situation, when in reality she was setting the wrong example for the youth kids and for the church, as that is something that went against the church, what the church stood for. Casey sought counsel about the issue and had to confront her by explaining what she was doing was wrong. It was a tough conversation, but it had to be done. The issue was resolved, and leader took a break from the youth ministry until she was married and everything was back in order. Now, when looking at Casey's challenge and comparing it from the managerial versus leadership role, Casey could mainly be viewed from the leadership view. Managers tend to plan, organize, and implement, while leaders tend to influence, create, and maintain vision in this case, and inspire. Casey's role in this situation required him to have influence and maintain the beliefs and rules that the church enforced. Not only did Casey confront the issue, but he helped inspire and work with the leader to get back to the leadership position where everything was dealt with. In regard to leadership characteristic resource, Casey used most of the aspects in ways that contributed to the conflict confrontment and resolution from a stewardship point of view. Now, when looking at power bases in terms of Casey's challenges he faced, power bases consist of how various leaders use their power to effectively handle the situation. For Casey, he used two types of power bases, but both used in different forms and approaches. The first one he used was stemming from the position of legitimate power. When looking at legitimate power, it is commonly referred as a position with formal approach to it as it's seen with a higher level of authority. This power base tends to have a greater sense of responsibility, which is why individuals who are in charge at the higher levels are typically categorized under this base. In Casey's circumstance, he was a top leader confronting a leader of lower position, hence the position of hierarchy. Now, the other type of power base comes from a personal power approach, being the expert power base. Expert power is a form of influence derived from a person's specialized knowledge, skills, or expertise in a particular field. Individuals possessing expert power are perceived as credible and trustworthy sources of information, and their opinions and recommendations carry significant weight. Casey not only used his own expertise, experience, and previous knowledge on the situation, but also from other leaders at the church to get others' opinions and counsel on the issue, so it wasn't just him. Now, the overall consequences and result of the conflict being resolved didn't have any long-term problems or negative impacts. Casey explained that when he went to the conversation, he had to accept the fact that the confrontation would either go very well and she would take it well, or he could be very aware that it could turn out very ugly. He said that he knew that he was in the right and he just didn't know how to articulate it, so that's why he sought others for advice and went in the conversation with a teammate. He went on to say that she took it hard and that she cried and was sad about the situation, but realized that it needed to happen. She took a step back from the ministry and the leader role she was in. She took the time off, and while she was in that time off, she got married and then eventually worked her way back into that leader role that she stepped away from. All in all, Casey handled the situation the best he could with the type of power that he had, and he used it arguably the right way and resolved the problem. Now, when comparing Casey to another leader who was in the same industry as him, the first person that came to my mind was Reverend Billy Graham. There are many major religious figureheads that I could compare Casey to, but Billy Graham really stood out for the sole reason that Casey and him both share the attribute of a very humble heart and have a very strong relationship-oriented values. Now, when I talk to Casey about the base of his beliefs and what they are and why he believes what he believes, it reminds me of how strong of a faith Billy Graham also has. They both stand strong for what they believe in. Take away the religious comparison between the two, and they still share so many qualities such as like public speaking, their servant-heartedness, and someone who just people look up to because of who they are as just the person. Now, with a lot of eyes on figures like Billy Graham and Casey, it creates a lot of pressure on an individual. There can be kind of this negative side to having a more quote-unquote public position. If they say something wrong, whether an accident or on purpose, depending on what it is, it can create unnecessary drama or negative opinions formed on them. Not everyone is going to agree with what you have to say, especially within a religious role, so there can be a sense of hate formed around these two as well. This can be seen as a weakness if Casey or Billy Graham can't deal with his opposition effectively. Now, comparing the two in the meanings of leadership theories, having relationship-oriented values is what makes them alike. Many people would argue that both individuals, quote-unquote, seek out the one, meaning they value and care for the people that they come across. Their humility-driven, servant-hearted empowerment and ethical leadership is what makes these two leaders very similar. Now, the more and more I dive into learning about how a church runs and operates, the more I realize and understand how similar business and the church really are. Now, I'm not saying and I'm not comparing them in the wrong attitude, but the way these two operate in the sense of leaders, financials, and the day-to-day operations, they really are similar, right? Like the quote-unquote saying, "Church is just a business." Um, Now, since Casey's part of New City Church, he agrees and follows the set missions, values, visions, and strategies that the church operates by. Just like how a business has a mission statement, on New City's website, they state their mission statement: "We exist to make disciples who take the message of Jesus to the places we live, work, study, and play." Casey explained how at New City they have their ministries in strategic place for reasons to fulfill and fuel the statement. Like they have Casey leading the college ministry to equip students where they quote unquote study. New City has family ministries in place in order to fill the term quote unquote live. These are just two examples of the church ministries in place. Casey also abides by the 7 set values that the church has put in place. The values are the vision that New City is for the church and what they see out of the various ministries individually and as a whole church. The values or vision influence how New City operates, which directly involves Casey. Now, like I stated earlier, the relation and similarities between church and business go hand in hand in many aspects. One of these is the idea of entrepreneurship. Now, yes, there's the figurehead of the pastor, but the church has many other leaders like Casey who operate in their own lane in the greater purpose of the church. Casey used an analogy in the pastors, how the pastors and leaders have their own pile of clay and how they can shape and form it with their own ministries, work, and relationships, and they're in charge of what it should look like, with some limitations, of course. The main point is that he's saying that the church has various pieces of freedom and they can use the resources and opportunities they have to put together the church. Now, in continuing the leadership lessons, some key takeaways. It's important to learn from leaders like Casey, whether that's to demonstrate things or to avoid things to be successful. The first thing that Casey said for behaviors to demonstrate was humility. He made it known that the number one thing he realized he needs to be successful, not only in the ministry world, but in life, is to be humble. He quoted his wife's father saying, "In life, you will either be a proud failure or a humble success. You can't have both. You can't have pride and success in the church world because that will lead to downfall." Great quote. Now, a lot of what Casey continued to talk about was all based around servant-heartedness and being in the trenches. Casey continued to talk about the idea of being a leader. Being a leader is that if you aren't willing to do the task as a leader, you are failing as one. The second thing Casey talked about was courage. It took it one step further, saying, in order to need courage, you need adversity, but adversity continue to be courageous every day. He quoted his wife's father again, saying, "Leadership is simply going first," which is stemming from doing things that others won't, but will follow. Casey talked about his experiences with courage. He experienced how he needed courage to go on the mission trip, courage to change his youth ministry, and the list goes on. Now, the attribute he said that you should avoid is taking things personally. Casey said that if you deal with the fear of messing up, it stems from the idea of pride and worrying about too much what people think in your life, when ultimately the only thing that really matters was what God's opinion. I like how Casey quoted St. J. Cole in one of his songs called "Pride is the Devil." Now, the reason why I chose to interview Casey was because Casey's a leader in my life that I've become very close to as of lately. He's become a great mentor, leader, and friend in my life, and was someone who I have and will continue to look up to as life goes on. Now, I chose Billy Graham because he's a religious leader I grew up with, listening to him preach. Now, I prepared questions to ask Casey throughout the interview to gain a better understanding of what I could gain out of this interview. A lot of them stemmed from his background, whether it's from his family or early ministry background. The only challenge I faced was trying to find a time to execute the interview. Now, I learned a lot from this interview. I learned a lot more than I thought I would. What I mainly took away from this interview was how to be more of a relational leader and how to lead people in a way that seeks the personal relationship within a person first. These are my references, and thank you.